So we've been concluding this discussion of Balkari, and we learned numerous opinions about the law of a Balkari not necessarily using a mikvah, but possibly fulfilling the obligation with Tisha Kabin and 9 kavs of water, and that would be good enough. But when does that apply? We had different opinions here. We had the opinion of Rav Dimi and said in the name of Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yehuda, and their opinion was only a chayla liyonsai. This was on page 22a. Only a chayla, only a sick person that is an oinas, that the impurity came upon him by mistake against his wishes. But a chayla hamargil, but a sick person that brings upon himself the balkari tuma, the impurity of balkari, such a person would need a real mikvah, would need 40 saw. And then we had the opinion of Ravin. Ravin gave the other view, and that's a little more lenient. And he brought a story about Rav Oishia. They asked Rav Asi, and the conclusion, his verdict was that a chayla hamargil, a sick person that brings it upon himself, that is a case where Tisha Kabin, where we could rely on Tisha Kabin, 9 kavs of water. So that would be the norm. That would mean that the regular situation, a person would be able to use the shower, use the Tisha Kabin, and would not need a mikvah. We're talking about a chayla, but even a chayla that's margil, even a chayla that brings it upon himself, he's the one who it wasn't against his wishes. He was with his wife, and therefore he would be tameh willingly, and he would be eligible as long as he's considered a chayla. He's weak. He would be eligible for the 9 kavod option, and that was Ravin's opinion, and he brought it from the Ravasi. He brought it from Ravasi. It was a discussion that they had in the lobby of Rav Oishia's house. And then we had the question, so what was Ezra Masakin? We seem to have these different views. We have mikvah, we have Tisha Kabin, and we know that biblically, none of this really works, because really you need to wait till the sun sets in order to be completely pure. In order to be able to touch holy items, you would need really to wait for later. So how does this work? What did Ezra say? Do you need to do Tisha Kabin? Do you need to do 40 saw? Do you need a real mikvah? Do you need a shower? So the Gemara has here 2 views. Abaye says, and this is what we learned yesterday, Abaye says that Ezra, he said a regular guy needs to have 40 saw. Regular person brings upon himself the tumah. He needs a real mikvah. If doesn't bring it upon himself, but he becomes impure against his will, then it would be good enough Tisha Kabin. So a bari hamargil, the term of the Gemara, bari hamargil would be 40 saw, and a bari la'oinsai, if he becomes tummy against his will, that's when Tisha Kabin is good enough. Then that was Ezra's takana. So within the decree of Ezra, there is this option of Tisha Kabin in the right situation for a person who does not bring it upon himself. That's Abaye's opinion. And then the rabbis came later, and they said they argued, what would the din be for a chayla, for a person who's sick? Do we tell him he has to burden himself, bother himself to get a real mikvah. So we have the different opinions that we were talking about, a chayla hamargil or a chayla liyonsa, either the chayla, a sick person, a weak person who brings it upon himself, or a weak person who against his wishes becomes impure. Is that the same as the bari, or is it different? Is there room for leniency? Now Rava argued, and Rava said no. Ezra was masaking tefillah. So he didn't talk about pouring water on you. And as I mentioned, and we learned yesterday in the Gemara, that the idea of Tisha Kabin, the 9 Kabin, doesn't work if you lie inside 9 Kabin, if you immerse in 9 Kabin. It only works when it's poured upon you. And so Ezra established 9 Kabin. Ezra established Tvila, immersion. It has to be a real immersion. So Rava therefore says, Ezra talked about Bari Hamargil Memsa, a regular person who's healthy. He brings it upon himself. He needs a real mikvah. That's what Ezra talked about. And let me just get the door for a second. Okay, so Rava's opinion is that Ezra only spoke about a bari hamargil, that a regular person who brings it upon himself, he has to use a real mikvah. And the rabbis came and they were masaking that a regular person, a healthy person, who becomes impure against his will, Tisha Kabin. So the rabbis after Ezra established the idea of 9 Kabin for a bari la'oinsai. Now comes the other rabbis after that, and they argue about a chayla, person who's weak. Which category do they connect him to? And there you had the opinion that either a chayla hamargil, a weak person, but he brings it upon himself, he's just like a bari hamargil and he needs a real mikvah. A chayla liyansai is like a bari liyansai. A weak person is just like a healthy person and he can do Tisha Kabin, 9 Kabin. Or if maybe a chayla hamargil, a weak person who brings it upon himself, would be enough with Tisha Kabin, and the chayla liyansai would be totally exempt. So that these are the different opinions that we're having, that we see here within the decree of Ezra. There seems to be some leeway. Now, what I found, what I think is important to look into now is, now that we see that there are these different views and different situations, we now have to go back and see what's the reason for the decree. Why did they establish the decree in the first place? And then see if it worked. Was it beneficial? Did it help in these scenarios? So, for example, we find 3 reasons for the decree. I mentioned 2 of them in the past, but there really is a third one, a very surprising reason. So does anyone remember what the reason, why did Ezra establish this decree that people should go to mikvah, even though they're not going to be 100% pure because they have to wait for the sun to set and so on. But yet, in order to daven and to learn Torah, the Ezra said, you know what, you got to go to mikvah. Now, going to mikvah was not always easy. Nowadays, it's a lot easier than it was, but it was a big headache. So why did Ezra make people do that? And it wasn't really, it's not clearly written in the Torah that you need this. This is the common understanding is that it's a rabbinic decree. And what was the reason for it? Does can anyone think of a reason? Why would he want us to go to mikvah? Besides, it's nice that people wash themselves. It's good to take showers. A little hygiene is always good. But what would the reason? What that wasn't his main reason. Yes, Ruven. You're muted. Okay. Yes, Ben.
Was it because of Nida? In case there's also Nida?
No.
No.
Yes, Ezra.
So that the men wouldn't be like roosters with their wives.
Right. So one reason was they shouldn't be like roosters and constantly with their wives. And if they have the burden of having to go to, let me mute everyone. If they would have the burden of having to go to a mikveh every time they're with their wives, they'll be a little less with their wives, and which is the rabbis felt that we shouldn't indulge, people shouldn't indulge so much, and therefore they established, Ezra established this decree that people should go to mikveh. What was the other reason? Any other reason that we saw? These are things we saw in the Gemara. So the other reason that we did see in the Gemara was this idea that when we got to Torah, we had a great amount of trepidation and fear and awe of God. And after a person is in a different mode, their mind frame is a mind frame of frivolity, they should go to mikveh afterwards to be able to study Torah and to daven, because that's you need to change the frame of mind. So not that they did a sin, but that we have to get in the right, we have to put our minds in the right place, so to speak. We have to change our mode. We have to change modes. So you go to the mikveh, you change modes from the previous mode to the new mode, where you'll now be able to have the right frame of mind to study Torah. So that would be the idea of reses and zeya that when we got to Torah, and therefore it says that the person who's about to carry, they would be prohibited in studying Torah, because they don't have that reses and zeya. And then we have a third reason. Now, the third reason, which is brought in the Rashba, very, very interesting. Interesting that he brings this as a reason. He says that if you look in the Gemara tells us that there was a story, and the story was that there was a person who was about to sin. And the woman that he was about to sin with said, "Do you have a mikvah to go to afterwards? Are you going to, did you figure out how you're going to go to mikvah afterwards?" And all of a sudden, it stopped him from this, woke him up, so to speak, and he decided, I better not do the sin. I don't have, how am I going to go to mikvah? So he basically stopped him from sinning. Now, the Rashba understands that to be the reason for the decree, that the decree of Ezra was to cause people not to sin. They won't end up sinning because they're going to need a mikvah afterwards in order to daven, to study Torah. So the reason of the story is almost, that's the reason why he established this. That's why he established this decree of mikvah. So it's so that he doesn't sin. It's the prohibition of znus, of having inappropriate, prohibited relations. So these are the three reasons. So according to this, let's take a look at each one. If the reason is that you shouldn't be like roosters, so how does that work with Tisha Kabin? If we're going to allow a person to pour 9 calves of water on top of them, and that's going to exempt them, it would seem that the idea of that Talmidei Chachamim should not be like roosters. It seems pretty clearly that if we allow the Tisha Kabin, it's not going to be, people, it's not going to help, because people now have an option. They don't have to go to a mikvah. They could just pour Tisha Kabin on them. It's no big deal. It's a very little headache. It's a very little burden if they could do. So it would seem if the reason is because of roosters, that would mean that you need a real mikvah. At least a regular person would definitely need a mikvah. But we can say maybe a chayla, person who's sick, there was more room for leniency. Now, if you have the other reason that the person needs a new frame of mind, we need to change his mode, it would also seem that, it's a little unclear what type of, what makes you change. How does your frame of mind change from going to the mikvah, from going to a mikvah? In a spiritual sense, maybe we could understand it. Physically, you're sort of like washing off your impure, your thoughts, your so to speak. You're just changing, somehow making a change. So you could question, does a Tisha Kabin work for that or not? Does Tisha Kabin really help you, change? You now like are changed. You changed. You're in a new mode, or do you really need a mikvah for that? And then the other reason of znus, it would also seem that that if a person is not going to sin, it's going to be if they need to go to mikvah. If they can just pour Tisha Kabin on them, if they could just pour some water over them, it doesn't seem like that's going to stop them from sinning. So the main decree of Ezra, and that's what we see on base, was definitely a real mikvah. It's just that the idea of weakness it seems to be what's giving all of these leniencies, and that's what the opinions in the Gemara, they seem to all be, or mainly be talking about a chayla, that there's room for leniency because someone's weak and someone's sick, or Talmidei Chachamim are considered weak. It says Torah's mateshes toicha shaladim, Torah makes people weak. So that's what seems that the reason for and room for leniencies, as well as the idea that a person didn't bring it upon himself, which that really touches upon that idea as well, I guess, could be discussed. According to that, in other words, if that was the scenario of a person having a wet dream, would these apply? The rooster reason doesn't apply. Person had a wet dream. The reses and zaya, maybe you might say maybe that would apply, because the person is not in the right frame of mind. Why did he have a dream? Maybe he was thinking about things that are inappropriate during the day, and therefore he had a mission, even against his will. But maybe his frame of mind, maybe he should go to a certain either a mikvah or at least Tisha Kabin. Now the Gemara seems to continuously say that he should be that they're more lenient for a person who doesn't bring it upon himself. So it does seem like the person who sees it against their wishes, who has an omission against their wishes, that they for sure should not need a mikvah. So we're just connecting the reasons with the scenarios, and that's why that it seems, at least from the Gemara, that the whole leniency of the Tisha Kabin is really someone who's weak. Now, I'm not sure why, but it seems that everyone relies on being weak because in the final, the way Rava ends off, Rava says, "Hilchasa bari hamargil v'chayla hamargil argoyim sa." The halacha is that if you're healthy and you bring it upon yourself, or a chayla that brings it upon himself, both of them need 40 sa. And a bari layoinsa, if a person is healthy and he becomes impure against his wishes, for him, tisha kabin, 9 kabin are good enough. And a chayla liyoinsa is putter from everything. A chayla liyoinsa is completely exempt. Now, the Rava's statement is a big question because who is he following? Doesn't seem to be following any of these views. He sort of takes a little from one view and takes a little from another view. And therefore, there is another version in the Gemara that makes that changes Rava's statement to the more lenient statement, to the more lenient opinion. And it says that Rava's statement is that a healthy person would be 40 saw, a chayla hamargil, a sick person who brings it upon himself, tisha kabin, 9 kabin are good enough. And that would be understandable that people are relying on that. And we seem to rely on the tisha kabin. In other words, there seems to be such an option whenever there's no mikvah available. People seem to rely on the tisha kabin option. Seems like that's a common thing to rely upon. And obviously, if you have a mikvah in town, that's great. But it seems that people rely on that. So it seems people consider themselves nowadays weak, which does fit in Shulchan Aruch, I guess, that we do consider our generation to be a weak generation, brought in numerous places, such ideas that we for our generation, we're not supposed to fast, extra fast days, even though in the previous generations they were stronger and so on. So I'm just connecting that maybe that's why people seem to be, it seems that the rabbis seem to allow Tisha Kabin. Now, when I say they allow Tisha Kabin, the 9 Kabin, really the final halacha is you don't need any mikvah or even Tisha Kabin, but it seems that there's an element of going beyond the letter of the law here. But even so, it just surprises me that we rely on, if you're going to go beyond the letter of the law, that 9 Kabin would work. Because really, if you're going to go beyond the letter of the law, you want to follow these views, it would seem that a Bari Hamargil should really do more than Tisha Kabin. So that's just a thought. I will also mention something interesting. They wrote a letter to the Rambam. There's a letter that they wrote to the Rambam about why doesn't he write about about going to mikvah after having relations. And the Rambam answered that in my book of halacha, I couldn't write that because according to the letter of the law, it was abolished. It was nullified, that decree. But of course I go. There's no question. So he and in fact, it's brought in the Rabbeinu Yoina. He brings the Rambam. Surprisingly, he brings the Rambam in the back of the Gemara. He brings this opinion of the Rambam. He says, he says, B'kach kosav Ramzal. The Rambam wrote this. B'chol Rosh Yeshiva Shababavel Tamu Alav. Lama Haya Mekel Kol Kach. Binyan Tfilas Balkari. Why was he so lenient regarding the immersion of a Balkari? V'hu Zal Heshav Lahem. And he answered them, Shemiyom of Loibotalaisa Filo Shoah Achas. He never once nullified the obligation of going to mikvah for himself. But he couldn't write it in his book. He could only write what it says in straight halacha. So in the book of the Yad HaChazaka, the Rambam writes that it was nullified. It was abolished, this decree. But but to think that he didn't go to mikvah, he says, I never missed it once. So this is so we see that there definitely is room for stringency, even though according to the letter of the law, we have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that it was nullified. Yes, Mel.
I was going to say that's why he considered himself a chassid. I don't know if he was a chassid, but that's where the chassidim are. They go every day, regardless whether they had relations or not relations, because they're tied in very close to Hashem, and that's what this is all about, I think.
Right. Well, so what you're saying is really the next step. There's really two beyond the letter of the law. Beyond the simple beyond the letter of the law is to do what the Rambam said, and that is that there's an obligation of going to mikvah whenever there is a seminal emission, and that would be the first level. Then the next level is to go to mikvah every day before you daven, because you want to have this purity before you daven. So just like in Kohen would make sure to be pure before he did service of Hashem. So before we daven, try to go to mikvah, be pure, to be 100% pure before we serve Hashem with our prayers. So that is the second. That's a higher level of beyond the letter of the law, and that is, that would be the reason of the Hasidim, as you're mentioning, that many Hasidim go to mikveh every day. The funny thing about it is that if you do go to mikveh every day, then it nullifies the whole purpose of the decree, because the whole purpose of the decree is Shalo Yehu Mitsuyan Eitzel Neshusem Ketar Negolim, that if we force you to go to mikveh, it'll cause you not to have relations as much. But if you think about it, if you go to mikveh every day, then the whole decree doesn't, the whole purpose of the decree sort of is nullified, because you're going to mikveh anyway. So it's not stopping you. But the thing is, obviously, you got to take the letter. It's not only the letter of the law. You got to take the spirit of the law as well, and of course, follow the spirit of the law. As well, with the idea of and of course not to indulge. Now, we're going to continue on at the two dots. Tanu Rabbanon. We're halfway down the page. We're on page 22b, halfway down the page, and this Gemara ends at the Mishnah. So it's let's see if we could get to the Mishnah today. So the rabbis learned, Tanu Rabbanon, the rabbis learned, Baal Keri Shenasnu Olav Tisha Kabin, Mayim, a Baal Keri, and on the side it says Baal Keri Choyla, a sick Baal Keri that's sick, if he poured on himself 9 kabin, or they poured on him 9 kabin mayim of water, tahar, he is exempt, he is purified. Bamed dvarim amurim, when does this apply? Liatzma. When does this apply? When he's learning Torah himself. Aval acherim, but if he's teaching Torah to others, our boyim saw, he would need 40 saw. He would need at least the size of a regular mikvah. That is the first opinion of this brisa. Again, a Baal Keri, if he's going to teach Torah to others, he's going to need a mikvah. We'll soon see that maybe he doesn't need a regular mikvah, but he needs the size. He needs like a mikvah. We'll say now he needs a mikvah. And if he's only learning Torah himself, or he's praying himself, fine. Then, Tisha Kabin, the 9 kabin, would be good enough. Rabbi Yehuda Aimer, and Rabbi Yehuda says, Mem saw, the 40 saw, that they said that you need 40 saw, it's mikol makom, however it is. is going to be okay. As long as you have the 40 saw. As long as you have that measurement. Again, 40 saw is a measurement. It's the size of a mikvah. That's the amount of rainwater you need in order for a mikvah to be kosher. And it's a few hundred liters. I forget already if it's maybe different opinions, of course. But there's I think it's like one opinion might be like 700 liters, or anyway, the laws of the 40 saw is considered the size that a mikvah needs in order to be a kosher mikvah of rainwater. And on top of that, they always, of course, they can add other water and as I mentioned, that every mikvah has two pools of water, and there's a hole that attaches the two bodies of water together. So the rainwater has to be 40 saw. So when you teach Torah to others, and this is a new qualification that we're getting now, that you want to rely on the leniency of 9 kabin, that only applies for yourself. But if you're going to teach others, you need 40 saw. Rabbi Yehuda says the 40 saw, however it is good. Now, Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina, there's two groups here. There's Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish, Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Shua ben Levi, and then you have Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. These two groups, they spoke about these laws, this brisa. Now, but we don't remember which rabbi said what. So we're going to say 4 names, and in these 4 names, one of them said this, and one of them said that. But we can't. Torah doesn't remember the author of who when this was repeated, they didn't remember exactly which rabbi specifically said which opinion, and therefore we simply have all 4 names, and we're going to just say one of them said this, and one of them from this group said this, and one of them from that group said that. So what did they say about this brisa? So 2 of them spoke about the first half of the brisa, and 2 of them spoke about the second half of the brisa. Again, the brisa said 2 things. Number 1, it said that if you want to rely on the 9 kabin, that leniency, that you pour 9 kabs of water on you, that leniency only applies if you're studying Torah yourself. If you're teaching Torah to others, you would need 40 saw. That's the first statement of the brisa. The second statement of the brisa is Rabbi Yehuda, and he says he's adding something that the 40 saw could be however it is good. So the Gemara now tells us what these rabbis said about these 2 statements. One of the first 2 and one of the second 2 spoke about the Reisha, the first statement. Chad Omar, one of them said, this, that the Brisa tells us that there's a difference if you're studying Torah yourself or you're teaching Torah to others. Mem saw that if you're teaching Torah to others, you need 40 saw. Loishanu, it's only learned ela lochela hamargil. That applies to a person who's sick, who brings tumah upon himself. So in that case, if he is a choila hamargil, he brought tumah upon himself, but he's teaching Torah to others, he would need to go to a mikvah. He would need 40 saw. What does the other opinion say? I'm sorry, before we get to the other opinion, but if a person is teaching Torah to others and he became impure against his will, tisha kabin, it's fine for him to have 9 kavs of water poured upon him. V'chad amar, and one of them, the other rabbi, says, Kol la'acherim, anytime you're teaching other people Torah, afilu chayla liyoinsa, even if a person is a chayla, he's weak, and he became impure against his will, ad deikam emsa, you always need a mikvah. So that's on the first part of the brisa. There's an opinion that's more lenient for a chayla liyoinsa. There's an opinion that a person who is a chayla liyoinsa, it's against his will, he became impure, that for him, even if you teach Torah to others, you can you only need 9 calves of water to be poured on you, and that would be okay. Now comes the second half of the brisa. And on the second half of the brisa, that was Rabbi Yehuda's statement that 40 saw, however you do it, is fine. So on this, they're going to be, these two rabbis are going to say something. One of this group of rabbis and one of that group of rabbis, one of the first group, one of the second group, they both speak about the final clause of the brisa. Chad Amar, one of them says, Hada Amar Rabbi Yehuda mem sa mikol makom. What does Rabbi Yehuda mean? That 40 saw, however you have that 40 saw, lo yishanu ela b'karka. That only applies if the 40 saw is in the ground. If it's in the ground, it's not in a vessel, that would not be good. It has to be 40 saw in the ground. Below, in other words, it can't be you can't have a pool above the water and have a 40 saw pool. A lot of people have pools that are above the ground. It's a vessel. That's a vessel. It holds 40 saw. That vessel that holds 40 saw above the ground, that would not be kosher, according to this opinion, for Rabbi Yehuda. He says you could use 40 saw however it is, but it does have to be in the ground. He does say, however it is, the 40 saw should be good, but what he means is in the ground, however it is good, as long as it's in the ground. The other opinion says, no, it's fine, even if it's in a vessel. V'chad amar afilu b'kelem nami, even in a vessel is also okay. It's fine. You have a pool above the ground. You can use that as 40 saw mikvah for a balkari who's going to teach Torah. You want to teach Torah? You need 40 saw. You can rely on this 40 saw that is above the ground in a vessel. Even a keli works. So these are the two opinions in Rabbi Yehuda's statement. Now, there's a problem. What did Rabbi Yehuda really say? Rabbi Yehuda says 40 saw, however it is, right? Mikol makom. However you do it, it should be good. 40 saw. Which opinion does that sound like? Does that sound like the opinion that says even if it's above ground? Or does it sound like it has to be only in the ground like a real mikvah? Which one does it sound more like? Yes, Ben.
As a matter of fact, Rabbi Yehuda didn't say anything about in or out of the ground. He said whether you teach yourself Torah for yourself or if you teach others Torah.
No. He didn't talk about teaching others Torah or not. That was the first opinion. He just adds one statement to that. He's just adding on and says 40 saw mikol makom. He says 40 saw that you mentioned. However,
in any case.
So what does that mean when you say in any case? However it is, 40 saw, however it is, should be good. That's what he seems to be saying. Now, does that fit with the opinion that says the 40 saw has to be in the ground, and if it's above ground, it's not good? Or does it sound from Rabbi Yehuda that even 40 saw above ground should be okay as well?
Both cases.
Which one do you think, Ben?
All the cases.
All cases. Mikol Makom. He says Mikol Makom, however it is, right? Yeah. Sounds like any way it is, if you have it above ground, 40 saw, it's good enough. However it is, should be good enough. So the Gemara now asks this question on the other opinion. Bishloima, it's good, Lamanda Amar, to the opinion that says, Afilu bekalim, even if it's in a vessel above ground, that's fine. Hainu detani, this is what it means. When we learned, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Mem sa'a mikol makar, 40 saw, however it is. Ella, but Lamanda Amar, to the opinion that says, Bekarka in bekalim loy, according to the opinion that says it has to be in the ground, and if it's in a vessel, like above ground, that would not be okay. Why does he say mikol makam? Mikol makam lasu yemai. What are the words? However it is. What does he mean to say by that? 40 saw, however it is. What does that mean to add? What is he including when he says 40 saw mikol makam? 40 saw, however it is good. What does he mean? What is he adding? So the Gemara answers lasuye mayim shu'uve, that he is including what we had learned earlier, that the mem saw, when you need 40 saw, that applies for even if it's not a kosher mikvah. It's 40 saw, it's got to be in the ground, but you can use water from the faucet. You don't need rainwater. You could use water that you are drawing and pouring in there. It does not have to be a kosher mikvah. That would be considered a option for a person who is teaching Torah. He's teaching Torah. He's a choila hamargil. He's a choila, a weak person who brought upon himself the this impurity of Baal Keri, and yet he is going to be allowed to go into a pool of water, as long as it's in the ground, but it's even if it's not rainwater. That's this opinion. And the other opinion says it could be even above ground. Even above ground is not a problem. And so he's even more lenient. Now, Rav Papa, Rav Huna, Bered Rav Yeshua, Rav Papa, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yeshua, Rava Bar Shmuel, and Rava Bar Shmuel. These three rabbis were sitting together and they were going to break bread together. They were going to eat a meal together. And Krichu Rifta Bahade Hadad. They were eating bread together. Krichu, it's a term used that they were breaking bread. They were going to eat a meal. Krichu Rifta. Rifta is bread. Bahade Hadadi together. Amalei Rav Papa. Rav Papa said, Havu li lididi livra. Let me do the grace after meals. In those days, one person would say the grace after meal, and everyone else would say Amen. That's the way it worked. And so Rav Papa said, I want to be the one to say the blessing. And the reason why is the nafal ilavi tes kabin, because it fell upon me. In other words, I had the tisha kabin, the 9 kavs of water poured upon me, and therefore I am allowed to recite Torah and have you in mind, because I had the Tisha Kabin. So I'm allowed to study Torah. He was saying I'm allowed to study Torah and say brachas because I had Tisha Kabin. And Amar Lahu Rava Bar Shmuel, Rava said, Tanina, we learned in a brisa. When does this apply about Tisha Kabin? That's only if you're doing it for yourself. But if you're saying a blessing for others, which is what you're going to be doing, you're going to say the grace after meal, and everyone else has to say is going to say amen. So you're having us in mind. That's considered for others. And for others, what do you need? What did we just learn? For others, you need mem saw. You need 40 saw. You need a mikvah. So you shouldn't bench for us. Ella, rather, havu li ladidi live right. Let me make a bracha. And here, surprisingly, the Gemara uses the words nafal ilavi, but it doesn't mean that. It says it fell upon me 40 saw. Rashi quickly tells us it doesn't mean that it fell upon him 40 saw, because that would not be a kosher mikvah. It just used that term because it previously used that term. But what he means is I immersed in 40 saw, and therefore let me do the grace after me. Because I actually went to mikvah, and I can have you in mind. You went to you did the 9 kabin. That's good enough for yourself to say blessings. That's good enough for yourself to pray and to study Torah. But you can't have us in mind. We just learned this brisa, right? We just learned that that's good for yourself, not for others. But I went to a mikvah, I can have you in mind. So Amar Lahu Rav Huna. So now Rav Huna, the third person, the third rabbi says, Havu li ladidi live right. Let me do the bracha. The leka ilavi, because there wasn't on me loy high beloy high. I didn't need the tisha kabin, the 9 kavs of water. I didn't need a mikvah dip. I'm pure. I didn't need any of that. And therefore, let me do the bracha. So this is a story that brings out the previous brisa very clearly, that when you say a bracha for someone else, it seems that you need that you would need tisha kabin, you would need 9 kavs. I'm sorry, you need a mikvah in order to have someone else in mind, and that's why Rav Papa, who said I tisha kabin, it's not good enough. It wasn't good enough, and Rava Bar Shmuel, he said, I went to mikvah, for me it's good enough. And then Rav Huna said, but I'm even better because I don't need any of it. I am pure. And therefore, he felt that he deserves to say the bracha because there's no question. He is 100%, he was 100% pure. Rav Chama Tavil, b'male yoyma de Pischa. Rav Chama went to mikvah on Erev Pesach, lahoiti rabim yedei choyvasan, because he was going to have other people in mind in order to either recite Hallel. He was going to have others in mind, and because of that, he went to the mikvah lahoiti rabim yedei choyvasan, because again along the same lines as what we just said in the brisa, that if you're praying for yourself, maybe you don't need to go to mikvah. You could do the tisha kabin. But if you're doing it for others, you would need a mikvah. You would need a mikvah, and therefore Rav Chama went to mikvah to have others in mind on Erev Pesach, and. But the Gemara concludes and it says, "V'leis hilchasa kavosei," but the halacha does not follow him. And what does this mean? So Rashi says that just like for yourself, it works Tisha Kabin, so also for others, it works Tisha Kabin. 9 Kabin should work. 9 Kabin should work for yourself. And then Rashi says that another way of understanding this, Veles Hilchos Kavosei, is that the halacha does not follow this whole thing. It doesn't follow this halacha because we don't paskin at all that you need Tisha Kab. You don't need anything. We follow Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that according to the letter of the law, you do not need mikvah for a balkeri. You don't need Tisha Kabin, you don't need mikvah, you don't need anything according to the letter of the law. Now, on the top of the page is Tosfos, and Tosfos says that the halacha doesn't follow this. He brings the same thing that Rashi says. He says that tvila, the halacha is not that you need tvila, arboim saw. Rather, even for others, it's enough Tisha Kabin. Or the explanation is the halacha doesn't follow this. It doesn't follow this whole this rabbi nor the entire Gemara here, because we follow Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira that says Divrei Torah is not makabel tum. So that's the same as Rashi. But then Tosfos says, but some commentaries explain that specifically for Torah, that's when we have we follow Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says that this whole rules were nullified, were abolished. Aval tefillah, but for prayer, sarich tefillah. For prayer, you really do need to go to mikvah. So this is a interesting source that, following the logic of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, what did Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira say? He said that for Torah does not become impure. That's what he said. So when it comes to studying Torah, there's no problem. But what about tefillah? Tefillah, it's not, first of all, we don't know if tefillah becomes impure. Torah doesn't become impure. Torah is holy. But tefillah is coming from you. Torah is coming from heaven. Torah is Hashem's Torah. Tefillah is something that's, that we are initiating, so to speak. Maybe tefillah is impure. Maybe it won't be accepted as well if you're studying it and if you're praying and you're impure. So there are opinions, not only in Tosfos, but it is brought down. There are such opinions that say that for tefillah you do need to go to mikvah or Tisha Kabin. And however, Tosfos concludes, he says Perish Ri, but the Ri says that it doesn't make a difference. Whether it's Torah or tefillah, and a person who goes to mikvah on Erev Yom Kippur should not make a bracha, because the bracha would be a bracha levatala, would be an extra bracha, because there's no obligation to go to mikvah, even though many people think that Erev Yom Kippur is an obligation to go to mikvah. Tosfos, the Ri, emphasizes you do not make a bracha. It is not an obligation. If you do make a bracha, if you recite a bracha, it is a bracha levatala, a bracha in vain. So that sort of concludes the discussion here. It does leave us up a little up in the air with regard to what to do, but what we know is, according to the letter of the law, a person doesn't need to go to mikvah, doesn't need to do the Tisha Kabin, but there definitely is room for stringency, as we see in Tosfos, for davening, or in general, even for learning Torah, there's definitely room for stringency. We did see previously in the Gemara that even a rabbi that said you don't need, even Rabbi Yehuda, that said you can learn Hilchas Derech Eretz and you don't need mikvah for it, he would go himself to mikvah before it. So you do see a lot of room for stringency, and that people can definitely go beyond the letter of the law. And the Mishnah Berurah does bring Tavayal of Bracha. If a person does go to mikvah, it definitely, even though it's beyond, it's not obligated. But if a person wants to be noyeg and be Tavayal of Bracha, he will be blessed. And it's interesting that the Shilas Etshuvas Min Hashamayim, there's a sefer, a book of halacha that one of the great rabbis many centuries ago, he used to ask questions in a dream before he went to sleep, and he wrote a whole book called Shilas Etshuvas Min Hashamayim, questions and answers that were given to him from heaven, meaning he didn't know the answer, and somehow his Hashem gave him the answer in a dream, and he wrote down an entire book called Shilas Etshuvas Min Hashamayim. And he writes there that there are goinim, there are great rabbis after the Talmud was completed. They're called the goinim. That they write that for tefillah, for prayer, you do need to go to mikvah. So he asked them that it seems like there are those that are strict, there are those that are lenient, and which is like the Ri we have, and they rely on Yerushalmi that says they bring proofs that it obviously is you don't have to go to mikvah, and so he asked this question. So the answer he got that it depends on the place where you are. One second. I'm sorry. I read it wrong. So he asked this question: can you rely on this leniency and say that it wasn't accepted in all places, and you don't really need to go to mikvah or even do the 9 kabin at all, at least in places where you don't have a minhag, or where the minhag is not that you don't need to do the mikvah or the 9 kabin. Or is the halacha like the goinim that you have to do it for prayer? And they answered him that from heaven that it says you should serve Hashem your God. This is tefillah. And is it possible for a person who's tamei to bring a korban? And he brings an answer of why the other opinion is not acceptable, and the fact that people don't go to mikvah, it causes the lengthening of galus, because if the Jewish people would pray properly, our prayers would have been accepted a long time ago. But the reason why our prayers aren't accepted is because we don't go to mikvah. So that's a real powerful statement from this Shalos Chuvas, I think was considered a Rishon. I think he was considered from the very early, I think in the 12th century maybe. I have to look up where, when he lived. Shilas Etshuvas Min Hashamayim. Let me just take a look here. Shilas. Okay, from the 1300s, Reb Yaakov Halevi, he was from the Balei HaTosfos. He was one of the authors of Tosfos. Wow. So he was a Rishon from early times, and he questioned this question based on these opinions that we see in Tosfos. And his conclusion was one of the reasons why we're still in Gullus is because our prayers are not answered because we're impure. Unbelievable.
But Rabbi,
yes,
don't we have an idea that we do not paskin shilas from Shemayim? We're here on earth, and because that's our operating field.
That's one of the big questions on this sefer, but it's talked about. They asked that question about how can you paskin from heavenly answers. They discuss it. When does that apply? And somehow, for whatever reason, this is a very powerful sefer. It is accepted. It's a powerful sefer. I'm just reading from where it's quoted. I don't actually have the sefer, but no, it's from the Rishonim. It's from Tosfos. He wouldn't have wrote it if it wasn't accepted. There's a reason why when that applies that we don't accept halacha from heaven. But anyway, it definitely gives us a little view of or direction. So it's definitely worth mentioning. Okay. I should also mention that the opinions that say that for prayer that you do need to go to mikvah for prayer is Rav Hai Goin, Orchos Yosher, Rabbeinu Hananel, and we saw it in Tosfos, in the Aguda also, and Rekeach. Wow, quite a nice amount. And even the Rambam, we saw that he himself felt that it's appropriate. So it does seem like a very important thing, even though according to the letter of the law, it's okay. It's okay not to. All right. Well, I think we've gone through this topic pretty decently, and hopefully we'll start the next Mishnah tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Okay.